Great. Well, welcome everybody. This is the last installment of this webinar series. We're going to be focusing on the engagement application and the revisions that we made to this particular application. We've already gone through restoration, technical assistance, and monitoring. And so this is our last webinar. So I have a series of slides that we're going to go through, and just to help provide context on kind of what changed, why we did what we did, what were some of our sideboards going through the revisions process. And then we're going to focus most of the presentation today actually in the engagement application. We're going to walk through the sections that we changed. We're going to highlight the changes. We're going to offer some tips and tricks along the way to help you all submit competitive applications. We are offering office hours after each webinar the following week. We've been coming up on Zoom and sitting around and just kind of having a space for people to come and answer questions if you didn't get your question answered today. So I'll end the presentation today with just a reminder of when that office hour is and how to access it. Anything to add here, Liz?
Nope, you covered everything.
Okay. So moving on, so why did we do what we do? Why did we change our applications? So the online applications have been around since 2016. There really hasn't been a whole lot of changes since then. There's been some tweaks to, words and questions, some tweaks to the guidance, but there really hasn't been kind of a full overview of how to streamline the application. And so that was really our intent. The agency is very much after continuous improvement. We've heard a lot of feedback from applicants, from review team members, that the application is long, it's somewhat redundant and a little repetitive in sections. Some of the flow is off. And so we had this opportunity to pull a group of people together to figure out how we can streamline the application, make things more clear, and hopefully provide a better product for you all to apply and access these funds. We also made a considerable change this time by removing all the questions associated with metrics. We're no longer collecting metrics at time of application. It's not necessary for the review process. And so just pulling some of those questions out freed up a lot of space in the application. If your application is going to be benefiting anadromous fish, there is potential. If the project is awarded by the board, you will have to provide metrics to OWEB after getting awarded, but more to come when we get through the review process and the awards come out in October. OWEB is doing it. We're creating a new database to allow folks to submit metrics on. So more to come on that. Anything I missed here, Liz? No? Okay.
Nope, you covered everything.
Cool. So how do we do it? So we had a group of people looking at the application. So we had about 7 or 8 OWEB staff members, and then we had a review team member to kind of provide that review team perspective. And kind of what we did is we printed out the applications on paper that included all the I-button guidance. We had our evaluation criteria handy to us. We had our Oregon administrative rules handy to us. And so we walked through what was existing in the application, and we looked at each question, we looked at each piece of guidance, and we asked ourselves, is this still relevant? Can we say it differently? Can we improve upon the guidance and the I buttons to make it more clear what OWEB is expecting? And so it was pretty fun to do something like that. And I'll just stress that we really, there were some times in some applications where we looked at the question and we're like, well, this question doesn't relate to the guidance. This question doesn't relate to the Oregon administrative rules that were abided by. So let's just get rid of it if it didn't have any relevance. So it was pretty freeing to have that capability to really take a pretty close look and try and streamline these applications. We went through a pretty rigorous testing process. We had almost half the agency at OWEB did internal testing, and we had about a dozen or so external testers. So we asked applicants, grantees, some review team members to test the applications, and we got a lot of great feedback from testers. We changed quite a few things after getting the applications tested. So we feel like we are presenting a pretty good product to you all. So we're pretty excited to be at this place and time. Anything that I missed, Liz?
Nope, you covered everything on our list.
Okay. So this is just a reminder about what we are able to fund at OWEB. And so um, just just to remind everybody, we get our funds from the lottery, which was constitutionally statutory given to us through Measure 76. And Measure 76 says that we can only invest in projects that benefit native fish and wildlife habitat and/or water quality. So we have this threshold and this bar that our applications have to meet. And that's on the left side of your screen. Engaging willing landowners to do voluntary conservation that has that direct benefit to fish, wildlife, and water quality. And so it's really important when we think about projects that that benefit has to be clearly articulated and that connection has to be very clear to us and to our review team members in order to be eligible to access OWEB funds. And I'm going to stress this for the engagement part because this is probably the offering that we see folks struggle the most with making that connection of engagement and the activities that are associated with engagement to how that's going to benefit fish and wildlife and water quality on the ground, voluntary watershed restoration. So just a reminder that that's what our funds are intended to be spent on. Anything to add here, Liz?
I would just emphasize that the statute is pretty verbatim. This diagram has a lot of language from the statute, and it's also in the Constitution. And it really does say outreach activities necessary for projects that acquire land and water interests, carry out fish and wildlife habitat. And so just emphasizing what Greg said, that just making that rationale from the outreach or the engagement you're proposing to those future projects, that is written into constitutional language. So that's why it's important.
Super. Thanks for adding that. Okay, let's get to the fun part. What do we change? So we have sections in the application. So we changed components in the problem statement section, in the proposed solution section, and the wrap-up section. I would kind of consider this the core part of the application. This is the part of the application that changes from the different types of applications that OWEB offers. And so we're going to be walking through each of these sections in the application here in a few minutes. But what we didn't change, there were some sections that we didn't touch. We didn't touch the administrative section. So this is where you identify whether there's permits or insurance, racial equality questions. We didn't change that. We didn't change the budget page. And we didn't change the funding and match page. We would like to change these pages, and we will likely change these pages into the future, but we didn't have the time and the space to change these pages because these pages hit every application that OWEB puts out the door. So its reach is much broader. And the IT associated with particularly the budget page and the funding and match page is pretty complex, and it's going to take a pretty big lift to rewire that. And so we didn't touch it this time. We are going to. I know there's been a lot of questions about the budget page and the funding and match page, and it's pretty challenging to get through. And so I just want you all to know that it's on our list to do, but we didn't do it this time around. Anything to touch on here, Liz?
Nope, you got everything.
Okay. So just a reminder that these new application versions are only applicable to the open solicitation offering. Um, so Yeah, you could see up here on the screen, more likely to follow come fall. So the October 2024 deadline is when the metrics database that OWEB's currently created will be completed. And so once that metrics database is completed, it's likely that more offerings will start to use these streamlined applications. But for right now, you can only use these streamlined applications for the open solicitation offering. And when you go into the online application system and choose open solicitation, you're only going to pull up the newest version of the application. So you won't have to choose if the system chooses for you. But this is just a reminder that for right now, it's only open solicitation, but certainly more to follow down the road. Anything to
Nope.
touch on here, Liz? Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I think at this point in time, we're gonna just go ahead and kickstart and get into the application. I'm gonna go ahead and stop sharing my screen for the PowerPoint, and I'm going to share my screen that has the online application system. And I just want to check with you, Liz, that you can see my screen.
I can see your screen.
Okay, super. So this is the screen you'll get after you log in, after you select Spring 2024 Open Solicitation, and after you select Engagement as your application offering. So this is kind of your home page, if you will, for this particular offering. So here on this bar, these are all the sections of the application. And so, like I stated earlier, the portions that we changed include problem statement, proposed solution, and wrap up. And so these are the sections that we're going to be going through today. Just a quick reminder that for this cycle, you cannot do the clone function. So the clone function is where you're able to take a past application and pretty much make a carbon copy of it for you to edit and submit. Because the application went through drastic changes, you cannot do that because you'd be carrying over an old application with different questions and different guidance, and the system wouldn't let you submit that old application anyway. So for right now, the clone function is not available. But it will be available to you after this cycle. Just because this is the first one in the transition, the clone function is not available to use. I will say though that when you log in, all your older applications are in there, so none of your data is lost. It's all still there. If you want to go in there and copy and paste any material to apply to this new application, you can do that. But I might encourage you to take a fresh look at it because the questions and the guidance has changed pretty considerably. And so it's always nice to have a fresh look on things. Anything to touch on here, Liz, before we get started?
No.
Okay. One more thing while we're on this page. So there's up here on the green bar, you'll see templates. And so if you hit this, you are going to get the ability to download any template for applications that OWEB has ever offered. And this can be a little bit daunting. And I bring this up because if you do use templates to share with your partners and just kind of work offline, you are going to want to use the templates that have the V2 in the title. So this is version 2. And you're going to see that for engagement. You're going to see that for monitoring. And as you scroll down, you'll see it for restoration and technical assistance. So that V2 is these streamlined applications. It's the newest version. So if you're going to use the templates, you need to make sure that you download the V2 version. The older versions are still up here because there is still offerings using the older application versions because they all haven't migrated over just yet. So just want to make clear that if you're going to use templates, please use the V2 version. And then just real quick as well, there's a feedback button up here. If you click feedback, you can leave a comment. There's a group of people that get together at OWEB once a month to review this feedback. Once feedback gets submitted, there's a subset of those folks that get an email right away. And so if there's something that's timely or um, that feedback is seen by OWEB in real time. And so I would encourage, if you're having a functionality issue or if you have like a clarity issue around content, don't hesitate to use the feedback button. There's people looking at it pretty regularly, and that's a tool that you all can use to help us better provide customer service. And I think from folks using the feedback tool over the years has really brought us to where we are today, because we've done a lot of changes based off of the feedback that we've received from folks. So I would encourage you to continue to use that. Okay, let's go ahead and get started. I'm going to launch into the problem statement section. Um, and you're going to see this first question here is kind of the overarching problem statement question. And this question is the same in all four applications. And so I think I neglected to say this earlier, but one of the things that we also strive to do when we did these revisions was to provide some parity across the applications. So we tried to have as much consistency and similarities as we could across all four applications. So when folks go from different applications, they could, oh, well, this is the same question in this application. So we tried to, do that as much as we could. So this problem statement question is the same as it is in all the other three applications. So just a couple things to orient you all. So under the I buttons, we have updated all the guidance throughout the application. And so there's a couple of consistencies here that I want to point out. One is that each of the I buttons now is going to have the relevant evaluation criteria that's applicable to the question being asked. And then there's going to be at least one example for what would be a good response to this type of question. So you're always going to have the applicable evaluation criteria, and then you're always going to have at least one example of what's a good response to this particular question. Some of the I buttons will have kind of overarching guidance, sometimes providing some definitions on terms. But I will encourage you to look at the I buttons. They've all changed. And so I think this new approach of putting the criteria in examples hopefully offers you all some more clarity on what we're looking for and what is the particular criteria that our reviewers are using when they're considering the answers of these questions. Another thing I'll throw out too is that we looked at the character limits on each question, and what we were noticing is that sometimes more information is not always better. Just because we offer 8,000 character limits, which was our last limit, doesn't mean we want 8,000 character limits. I think there's a balance of art and science and how you can provide an answer. And so I think one of the consistent themes that I've been telling folks over these webinars is to be as clear, direct, and succinct as possible. And these applications are stories of your projects, and they don't need to be 100 pages long. And so I would just continue to stress the succinct, direct threshold of when you're answering these questions. And so the next couple questions I did want to kind of go over a little bit because they are specific to the engagement offering. And so this question here, we had a similar question in our old application, but kind of helping us understand some of the social, political, geographical, or financial challenges. So this is really your opportunity to kind of delve into some of these complexities that are kind of elevating your project's need to do engagement with stakeholders, with landowners, with community members, with agencies. Maybe it's a challenging geography because there's been some, past practices that didn't go well, or there's some financial, things that are, raising this project's need to get an engagement application. Certainly social and political nexuses with, helping us understand. And this is kind of, elevating the justification as to why engagement is necessary, and just being really transparent about some of those challenges that, we all face throughout the state when it comes to bringing people together to generate consensus to continue the path forward to implement conservation on the ground. And so this is really just a good opportunity for you all to kind of highlight some of those challenges. And so again, you're going to see in the I button the evaluation criteria that's applicable to this question, and then an example. And then the next question is just helping us understand who those target um, audiences are within the geography, and then also helping us understand whether or not there are local communities disproportionately impacted by climate change, and whether or not their engagement is going to be a part of this project, and how those particular folks are being engaged. And so I did mention that at some point in time that the I buttons will be providing definitions to terms. So if you're a little bit unclear on what constitutes a community disproportionately impacted by climate change, we do have a definition for you to review, which is right here. And again, this question, I button criteria, sorry, too many things here. We'll also have the applicable evaluation criteria and then an example of how you can respond to this question. So that's kind of the project description. That's kind of setting the stage, kind of getting us started to better understand the problem, some of the social, political, geographical, financial issues, and then some of the folks, the communities, the people you're going to be involving in your project. So the next two questions are going to be exactly the same as they are in each of the other applications. So project history. So we have two questions here: continuation phased. If it's a yes, then we're going to ask that you provide us the OWEB grant numbers that are applicable, and then having a little bit of space to help us understand what was completed as part of the previous project that you're continuing. If it is a resubmit, again, we're going to ask you to provide those OWEB grant numbers if it's a resubmit. And we ask you to provide these because in the review process, this is really helpful. So what we do when applications are submitted that are resubmits, we actually pull the old evaluations and include that into the application package for when our review team members review these applications. They then have a copy of the evaluation, so they kind of know how the application was reviewed the last time it was submitted. So that's kind of the reason why we asked for the older OWEB grant numbers. And then, one thing that did change in this revised application from the previous version is that we used to have all the sections of the application broken out here in terms of describing how those concerns have been addressed. We've taken that away. We were finding that folks were kind of inputting like a lot more detail into those boxes than we would have liked. And so at this point, we really just want to know what changed and where in the application you can find that change. And so our I button guidance is an example of our previous budget had lump sums, and so we've addressed that. Look at the budget page. And so this is not a place where we want you to go into great detail. If it's a question about capacity of your partners, you can say that we've addressed this and this is where you can find it in the application. So that just prompts the reviewer to know where to look for how those evaluation concerns were addressed. And so scrolling down, we're in the plan section. And again, these two plans questions are the same as they are in the other three applications. So the first question is just helping us identify what the plans you're using to that your project has been identified in. And then the second question helps us understand within that plan how is your project related, and where is it in that plan, and how does it relate to what that plan stated. And so what I'll mention here is that I would encourage you all to just list the most applicable and appropriate plans that are relevant to your project. Just because you list more plans here doesn't mean your project is more important. In fact, it prompts you to do more work because the more plans you list, the more specific sections in those plans you have to help identify. And so I would just encourage you to just make sure that you just give us the plans that are most applicable and appropriate, and think of it in a time scale too. Plans that were done in the late 90s or early 2000s, they're over 20 years old now. And is that still applicable and appropriate? If it is, by all means. But give it a thought. Yeah, like I said, there's just because you list more plans here doesn't mean your project becomes more important because it's been identified in more plans. So that's more is not always better. And I'm going to check with Liz and see if I missed anything or anything to cover.
I was just going to highlight, if you can scroll back up to the top, the first question about describing the environmental stressor. This is one of the first places to help set the stage on how your project connects to fish and wildlife habitat and water quality, to help with that constitutional connection. And in this question, I think trying to tell us a story about what is the habitat potential or the watershed potential, water quality, water quantity that could result from starting this conversation. What were some of the pieces that you were looking at, or the data that you were looking at, that said we need to start having a conversation with the community about the need for restoration? For example, if it's oak habitat, which is common in the Willamette, looking at, was there a mapping exercise that really pointed out, here's some of the sites that have a lot of oak habitat potential. This is how we know. This is about how much habitat we think could be restored, just to give that sense of what is the potential. Not that it has to be a guarantee crystal ball exercise where you're able to predict something, but just give us a sense of why you're proposing to have the conversation and what could come out of it in terms of a watershed benefit. But you
Great.
covered the rest.
Super. Good point. Any questions at all in the chat? Or no? Okay.
No questions.
Okay. So we're going to move over to the proposed solutions section. And so this is going to look similar to the previous application where we have these 4 different eligible project types that you can go ahead and check. And you can check as many or as few as you would like. There are no additional questions or call outs after you do the check boxes. And just this, again, is another easy exercise to help us understand what that connection is of the engagement to that fish and wildlife and water quality benefit. And so as we're moving down here, we have our goals and actions section, and this is going to look similar as it does in the previous applications with a small little caveat. But the goal statement is certainly the same as it is written in all the other applications. And a goal statement is really just that. It's a 1 or 2 sentence high level statement of what you hope to achieve. A lot of times what we've been seeing over the years is paragraphs put in here. Like we'll have a goal statement that will have a couple sentences, and then folks will start to launch into why we need to do that, and even almost how we're going to do that. That will come in the sections below this. This is just really high level. It really kind of sets the stage on what you hope to achieve ultimately with this engagement. So you're going to see a 500 character limit here. We really want to keep this, pretty high level, that 1 or 2 sentences, kind of, your overarching goal. Of course, you're going to look at the I button guidance, and you're going to see the relevant criteria that this question relates to, and then you're going to have an example of, what we would consider a good response to this question. And so after you identify your goal statement, you're going to have opportunities to elaborate on the different actions you're going to take to achieve your goal. And so similar to the other applications, you have these plus signs this allows you to add more actions. So this is what we call a repeater function. And so within, let's say, action one, you list your quantifiable action. And I'll stress the word quantifiable. We want to, you know, um, emphasize to quantify this as much as you can. And you can see the I button in here for guidance to help you kind of, further understand what that might look like and what an example would be. Um, and so, and this is your opportunity here is to tell us how you're going to implement that action. And so you'll see the character limits are representative of the level of information that we feel is going to be necessary. So, pretty straightforward in terms of listing the quantifiable action, and then a lot more detail here for how you're going to actually implement that action. Um, and then this is unique to the engagement application. And this was from the older application, and we decided to keep it in because it is really relevant. And I think it helps kind of connect the dots into how success will be determined. And that is specific to that particular action that you identified. And so this is a great way to, if one of your actions is to, convene workshops over a series of 3 years, and your hopes and dreams are to engage, so many different community members or community groups. This question here, how will success be determined? That's where you can help us understand your expectations of achieving that action. And that's just really helpful for the reviewers to understand like what you expect to be a result out of this particular action. And so you'll see the I button guidance here. You'll see the applicable criteria that is associated with this, and then an example of what would be a good response to this question. You can add as many actions as you wish. So just go ahead and use the plus sign, and you can add away. So scrolling down here, this is a new function we have for this these application versions. And this is also the same as it is in all the other applications that we redid. This is what we're calling our project work plan table. And so in the past, we had a project elements table, and we also had a project management table. And so what we thought when we were going through the application revision process is like, wow, wouldn't it be really cool if we can marry these two tables and kind of ask for all that information in one table? Because we felt like it's pretty powerful to have all this information in one place. And so we were able to do that. And so what we're really asking for in this table is to, identify your action, and then, identifying the responsible entity that's going to be implementing that action, their role in implementing this project, the qualifications and relevant expertise that they have that suits them well enough to implement that action, and then kind of a date range. And so what I would envision, complete applications to look like is that if you had 3 actions up here, you would have 3 actions identified in your work plan table to kind of sequentially help us understand what the action is, who's involved, how they're involved, why they're involved, their relevant expertise and experience, and then kind of a date range for implementing that action. And similar to the table above, there's this plus sign you can do to, you can add rows or copy rows. And then this little pencil here just allows you to edit what you have written in there. And so this is also a good place to plug, so you're making connections with your goals and actions up here into your project work plan table. And I think we would go as far as to say that in your budget, we would see these, actions transfer from up above here to what's identified in your work plan, and then what's identified in your budget. And that way the reviewer can tell they've identified these actions. They've talked about, who and how and why in the work plan, and then they've associated those actions in the budget. And so it's that line is really clear. And that just, further completes the story that you're trying to tell with submitting a full, complete, clear application. And so I would encourage to think about that process and have that really clear line delineated between your goals, your work plan table, and then what's identified in your budget. So items in your budget should be here identified in your work plan and in your actions up above. Um, and that completes the proposed solution section. Anything to add here, Liz?
I was looking to see if we have questions. We don't have any questions. I just think that last piece that you said is really important, and I would just highlight it that this work plan table really does put together how the actions, the people, and the money are coming together into a work plan. And an example of what we mean by that is if there's a staff person or a contractor in the budget, they should show up in this table and explain how are they qualified and what part of the project they're working on. And just everything Greg said is true. It just really helps the review team get that broader understanding of how all the parts of the project are working together.
Great point. Okay, we are going to
We can
migrate.
move forward.
Okay, this is the last section that we updated in the application, and it's pretty brief. So this is just our wrap-up section, what we call our benefit section. And so this question is one that we had an iteration of it in the last application, but again, this is kind of a question where you all have the opportunity to further elaborate on how this engagement was going to lead to future restoration or acquisition. And so I can't stress enough, this is your opportunity to make that connection of how you're engaging is relevant and needed to support future on-the-ground eligible restoration and acquisition. And so this is your opportunity to elaborate on how those connections are going to be made and what those benefits are going to be as a result of successful engagement. And so you'll see an I button here that will go ahead and just kind of provide some overarching guidance here, and then talk a little bit about what the applicable evaluation criteria, and you can see there are 3 different appropriate criteria applicable, and then just an example of how people could respond to this question. And then the next question is one that, if you've ever filled out an OWEB application, is going to be abundantly familiar, and that is the infamous, does this project benefit salmon or steelhead? And so this is the major part in which we were able to pull out metrics associated with our application. So in the past, if you would have selected yes, all these pop-ups would have came up helping you identify the specific ESU for the species, the recovery plans. That information is no longer needed at time of application. Like I stated earlier, if you select yes, there is a potential that you would have to report metrics to a project that is funded. And that is only because projects that get funded with Pacific Coast Salmon Recovery Funds that OWEB uses only on anadromous fish projects, we have to report metrics to NOAA. And so those are the only project types that would have to report metrics. And so if you select no, you will not have to report metrics, and there's nothing in addition to answer in the application. And believe it or not, that is the completion of what we did. While we're on I do have a couple slides to wrap us up on, but while we're here, I've said this in other webinars and just kind of want to say it again too with the uploads function. Be cautious when you use uploads. Just because you can upload something doesn't mean you should upload something. And just because you upload something doesn't mean that the reviewers are going to review every page of what you upload. If you upload a 200-page action plan, it's pretty unlikely that the reviewer is going to read all 200 pages of the action plan, because It's pretty unlikely that all 200 pages are directly applicable to your particular project. So I would caution and say only upload what is necessary to further support and aid what you put in the application. If you want to identify what's in that action plan that's applicable to your project, I would encourage you to take a couple of those pages out of the overarching PDF and just incorporate those 2 or 3 pages or whatever's applicable and appropriate to your project and just upload that. I think what we have seen is that if you upload too much and too much things that are not directly relevant, you start to muddy the amount of material that gets presented to the review team. And so I just would encourage that use the uploads gently and only when you need to emphasize or support something in the application. Um, so I go ahead,
Chrysler,
Liz.
we have a couple things. We have a question, and before I ask it, I was going to just emphasize, excuse me, on this particular page, this benefits question, just circling back to the constitutional language. This is the other place where you can really make that connection of how the proposed engagement activities will be leading to and are necessary to lead to this fish and wildlife habitat restoration and connect it to the information that you put in your problem statement. So this, I think, question is actually one of the most important places to make that very clear, that rationale very clear is this is the habitat or the watershed benefit or water quality quantity benefit that we are targeting with the engagement project we're proposing. And we do have a question. So the question is, in the application process, it may be premature to identify specific consultants prior to a grant award. Can we use generic description of subcontractor qualifications for those specific roles?
Yeah, that's a great question. I'm really glad that got asked because, yes, by all means, if you don't have the particular entity already identified, you can a kind of an applicable response could be contractor, consultant not identified yet. These are the types of expertise and experiences that we're going to be looking for when we actually do the solicitation to hire those services. So yeah, great question. Totally fine and understandable that you're not going to have everybody already dialed in at time of application, but stressing what types of qualifications, what types of experience and expertise will add to the value of, oh, okay, that makes sense. Like they don't have this group or person identified, but this is the types of experience and qualifications they're looking for. That makes sense. So yeah, I would encourage that is totally fine and really kind of helping us understand what you're really looking for in the qualifications piece. Yeah, good question.
We have a couple more questions coming in. Do the interests, quote unquote, interests that can be acquired include conservation easements, entity held, and fee simple purchases? What are the stipulations and requirements for each, if so? So I can jump in, Greg, and you can add anything if you'd like. So yeah, yes, interest can be acquired, can be conservation easements and fee simple purchases. If the engagement offering can provide funds to have any of the kind of the conversations or outreach that needs to be had to get to that acquisition project. The second part of your question, I think, would be answered through our acquisition program offering. And so I think we would probably want to have that conversation outside of this training. The next question is, for describing contractors, how can we get a reasonable range of cost for an interviewer or an outreach person? I think that might also be something that we can talk about outside this training, since it's not related to how the application has changed. And actually OWEB really can't provide guidance on costing. That's something that applicants look into and provide that information in their application. How did you determine cost? And often I recommend folks to contact other grantees or applicants in the region, because folks that are doing that kind of work and writing applications for OWEB probably have a better handle on how to find those cost estimates or what's reasonable.
Good
Any
point.
other questions about how the application changed or how to use the application? All right, I think we can go to your final slides, Greg.
Okay, so I'm going to stop sharing the application. And I'm going to reshare the PowerPoint. I just have two quick slides to review. Um, and this slide is one that we've been showing at all the other webinars and feel like it's an important one to review. And that is just reminding that the applications are the scope of work. So if your application does get awarded and funded, it is the scope of work. And so what I would encourage you all when you're writing the application is that what does a clear scope of work entail? And so a clear scope of work identifies, the who, the what, the where, the why, the when, how much, how you're going to do it. If you have all these particular components clearly identified in your application, which there's space for you to elaborate on all these, then the reviewer is going to have a pretty clear image on what you're doing. If there are points in the application where, well, we know exactly where they're going to do the work, but the how part was a little bit fuzzy to us, or the cost wise, we weren't really sure on the budget, didn't really make a whole lot of sense. There was lump sums. It was really hard to understand. Um, that's when things are becoming a little bit less clear. And when things become a little less clear, there certainly becomes a lot of more questions being asked about the application. And when things become less clear, that means that the scope of work is not fully understood. And so I would just encourage, think of it like this. If you were hiring somebody at your house or wherever you live to do something, you would want to know all these specific details, right? Because you're hiring somebody for a service and you want to get that service done right and for the amount of money that you want to spend. And so I can't stress enough how important it is to have all these components really clearly articulated in your application. Don't give the review team an opportunity to ask questions about, well, this wasn't really clear. This particular part of the application, it was unclear who was going to do what or how much that contractor costs, or they gave us maps, but they were at a really coarse scale and they didn't have the specific detail on it. We didn't know where the project was in context of this. Really think through that concept that your application is the scope of work. If you go to hire a contractor, all these things are really dialed in because you want that contractor to do exactly what you are asking them to do for the amount of money that I have available. So this is just an opportunity for you all to kind of provide some clarity on what a full, complete, clear scope of work looks like. We want the review team member to see this, not that. Anything to add here, Liz?
Nope, that was great.
Okay. Well, our last slide is that we're done. We've done all 4 webinars. Thank you for hanging out with us. If you've came just for today or all 4, super appreciate your interest in our offerings. We do have one last office hour, which is next week from 1 to 2 p.m. The Zoom login information is on our website. And this is just an informal time for you to come and ask questions and seek some clarity. And because we are done early, I think what we can do is stop recording. And then if people want to stick around and ask questions in a more informal